Hello everybody and welcome to this, what is going to be the first, hopefully, of a monthly series where I'm going to be checking out Heroes Infinite. This is by Raging Heroes. This is their subscription service where you can get all sorts of stuff every month. There's tons of stuff comes out every month. They do a whole range of different themes, like fantasy, sci-fi, all that sort of stuff. So we're going to be looking at what the June releases are, which is a whole bunch of steampunk sort of 18th, 19th century adventures, you know, that typical steampunk sort of feel. And I've decided to choose a model and we're going to go and 3D print it because Heroes Infinite is all about 3D printing your miniatures, which is great because it's very accessible, and I'll be able to show you now how easy that can actually be once you have a printer and anything like that. So if you're new to 3D printing, be patient. I will give as much detail as I can or as much information as I can to make it seem a little less daunting in a way. So the first thing to do is to pick a miniature, which I have already done. And this is, these names, Marquita Mendoza, Atlantean Explorer. I wonder why I picked her. I wonder, could it be the machine gun? I think it's the machine gun. So Heroes Infinite allows you to download files in several different formats. So either an unsupported STL file, a supported STL file, or an LYS file, which is also a supported file. Now, what do those mean? So the basic file is not supported. It's just the 3D model, absolutely no supports, no scaffolding or anything like that on it. So that would require you to do all that yourself in your slicer program. The supported STL files and the LYS files come with all that pre-done. So you basically drop it into your slicer program, tell it to slice it, save it out to your little pen drive, stick it in the printer, and away you go. That's how easy that is. However, what I'm going to show you is both methods being run on the same printer at the same time. So we have our files downloaded, and I'm using Chi2Box Pro as my slicer program. It's fairly expensive. It's a yearly fee, usually of $168. I managed to get it at a reduced cost of $90, so roughly £70. But it gives you plenty of tools that you can play with. So as you can see in here, I have everything already set up. This is running off, or set up for a Mars 3, which is the Elegoo machine, which I recently got myself. And this shows you your build plate. So I'm going to open my folder and I'm going to bring in the unsupported files first. We're just going to drop those in from the folder and let it do its thing. It'll move things out of the way or whatever. Usually, yeah, there we go. Chi2Box Pro automatically detects collisions and moves parts around, so you're not going to be running into anything problematic there. So this is what an unsupported file looks like. So it just, whatever way the orientation is, that's how it is. So what we can do here is select both our parts. We can then go to prepare auto orientation. That moves them in such a way that it'll be ready for taking supports. And you can see the sort of orientation that Chi2Box wants to have, where our poor girl is flying headfirst into the build plate. So what I'm going to do is run it like that and see what happens, because if I move these off to one side, we also have the supported files, which I'll also drop in, and you'll see the difference between them. Okay, so let's just move this stuff very briefly. And you can see the different orientation that Raging Heroes themselves have set up. She's got a lot less supports on the upper surfaces of the model. It's all basically underneath. Same with the base. It's at a nice little angle, has some texture on it that will print really nice on the Mars 3 as well. So, because we're going to be running both, I'm going to leave the auto orientation parts the way they are. I'm going to separate our supported files out a little bit. I think maybe move that back, just to give everything enough room. So what I need to do now is select both unsupported parts, go to my support tab. That starts calculating everything. It shows me the shape of the supports that I want to do. My printing, I usually run a sphere shape connection point, because when the supports come off after the print, I'm left with a little nub that I can easily file down or sand away, rather than occasionally the support will break into the model and leave a little divot, which I don't want to fill. I'd rather be sanding than filling. So with these all there, let's just apply all. and this will auto support. Okay, so not too difficult there. Looking around the model, you can see where all the connection points are. I have a feeling that some of these bullets up here are going to be a bit misformed because of the support structure touching them. But apart from that, I'd say that's okay. Although, what I would like to say is that is the medium level support. So if I select light supports, I'm going to remove all here just to show the difference. And again, I want to make my contact shape a sphere, which is a smaller sphere because they're lighter supports. And let's apply all again. This should make the supports thinner, a little more easier to deal with after the fact. And yeah, so what we're getting here is less damage on the model around those the bullet tips. And I think we'll try it with that and see what happens. So from this point, what I need to do is go back to my Prepare tab, which brings everything back in. I'm going to move these two a little bit further out of the way. So nothing's colliding, nothing's getting in the way. I'm happy with that as is. We'll see what this does. I'd be very interested to see how this base turns out with that support left out like that. I have a feeling this could be a failure, but that's fine. As long as we get our pre-supported ones out, that should be great. So at this point, we're just going to go down here and hit Slice. Slice is going to tell us how many layers the 3D printer needs to create the model with, and roughly how long it's going to take, and also how much material it's going to use, how much resin it's going to use. So you can see here now, it's saying roughly 7.5 or just over 7 3/4 hours. The slicer program is always a little bit off. It's going to underestimate and the machine itself is going to overestimate. So we're still looking about a day's worth of printing to get the miniatures out. What we can see here as well is if we start scrolling up through our layers, we can see how the print is going to form and what the images are, because all the 3D printing is sending UV light through resin in a range of images. So we have 3,347 layers. My curing settings are about 4 seconds per layer, so that's not too bad. So we're going to be doing that for about the majority of a day, really. What I tend to do is set a print to go towards the end of the day, let it run overnight if I have a nice quiet space to leave it in. And because we're in the office, I do. At this point, we're then going to save it out. And we have to save it straight to the flash drive that is going to be plugged into our 3D printer. We can't save it to the desktop, for example, and then save it from there. The file seems to corrupt. So we're just going to leave the name as it is, and then we're going to save it. This is going to take a while. So once that's done, we're going to head over to the printer and show you the setup for that. So now that we've saved our file out onto our flash drive, we can finally go over to our printer. And this is my baby. This is my Mars 3, the Elegoo Mars 3, and it's a 4K screen, nice size of a build plate for the size of the machine. Absolutely great. I've had no real problems with it that are beyond user error. So it's a nice, tidy machine. It works well. It's quiet. If you're wondering about 3D printers and if you should buy one or not, if you have a small amount of space at home or whatever, this one in particular has a very good fume filter on it, a very good fume extractor. It has a active carbon filter on it that sucks air into the build area and then back out through the filter. So there's not a lot of fumes coming off of it. However, do put it in a room where it's out of the way and it can get some ventilation anyway. My other one, my Creality, has a lot more fumes that come out of it. I don't know how the venting works on that. Anyway, let's switch it on. And then we're going to do what's called setting the 0 point on our printer as well. This should be fairly universal for most resin 3D printers. It should be a very similar process. So our build plate is here. Our build plate has been loosened, so it's free moving on top of the bed. This is how we set it up. Then I need to take a little piece of paper, slide it underneath, and what I like to do is line it up with the edge of this black tape so that I can see how to square everything up. So that's where I want that. We then need to go to Tools, Manual, and then this button, which means Home. What that's doing is putting the build plate to its 0 point, but also this piece is sprung and suspended. So you can see when it settles back down, it'll reduce that level a little bit, like so. So that's it at its 0 point, or the arm at its 0 point. So what I want to do is just square it up with the edge of the piece of paper, which is pretty much where it's at. Once we're happy with that, we then need to tighten these two Allen nuts up. Just a little sort of half twist. That should be it. Then what we need to do is make sure that this is set correctly. So what I'm going to do is select the least amount of movement and then up a little bit. And what we're looking for is a bit of resistance on the piece of paper as it moves around, but not too much. In fact, that's pretty much it. But if I went down again, it's a lot harder to move. So I want to go up one step, which seems about right. I'm then going to back out of that. And you can see the set 0. We'll confirm that. That now tells us that where the plate is currently sat is the lowest point this plate is going to be. So it's not going to push itself through and damage the screen or damage the material that you're already printing from. At this point now, we're going to stick our USB drive in. Move that bit off to the side. So with our set 0, we're going to move the build plate out of the way. I do about 12 so that it's about 120 millimeters up the way. While it's doing that, what we'll then do is get our tank ready, slide it in, and it sort of sits into a little groove on top. And something that's important that I have forgotten in the past is these two screws to select the tank down. Because if you don't put these in, the resin actually solidifies enough to actually lift the whole tank up with the build plate, which I have done in the past. Which isn't very smart of me at all. Now, onto our resin. The resin I'm using is Elegoo's own resin, which is a water washable resin. That doesn't necessarily mean the water is going to clean it properly. What you need is other materials, but I can get to that once we've done the print. So this is a nice ceramic grey as well. It makes the models look really good. Give it a shake, because you are told to actually shake this stuff, even though people say you shouldn't. 6 of 1. We're then going to pour a measure in. And I think I'm just going to let the bottle drain because it's nearly at the bottom of it. But for 8 hours of printing, that should be more than enough resin. I always like to do a little bit more, especially if I know I'm going to be running the printer overnight. So even before I leave the office, for example, I'm going to check it and top it up if I think it's getting a little bit too low. The next thing we need to do is put our cover on, which acts 2 ways. It seals the interior space so that the air filter can do its job properly and stops the fumes spreading around. It's also a UV shield, so no UV light around is going to affect the quality of the resin in there, because it can, even under regular sunlight, it will start to solidify and you can ruin the resin you've already poured into the tank. So with the printer all set up, we are now ready to print, which is great because this is the easiest part when it works. So all we need to do is press our print button, which brings up all the files I have on the flash drive. There's a lot of stuff in there you don't need to know about. And I believe we have, this is our file, and then we press play. And that's that. So what's going to happen now is we're going to see the first few layers being printed. They take a little longer because the base few layers form the raft, which allows the rest of the model to be adhered to the build plate properly. So it's going to do that for a few layers, and then it'll start to speed up as it gets into the actual layers for the miniature and the supports. So what we'll see down here will be an estimated time elapsed, and how much time is remaining, as well as what layer it's on. So when the bed reaches the very bottom of the tank, it should, once it does all that, it'll go down, then up, then down again. And it'll now set itself for layer 1. We should see down on the bottom here, it'll switch to printing layer 1. It shows us the layer. That's the image that it's now projecting on to the resin, which is now being adhered to the build plate. The first few layers are going to take about a minute or so to cure, but then after that, it's just a case of letting the printer do its thing for the next potentially 8 to 9 hours. So we'll come back in 8 to 9 hours, which for you will be about 2 milliseconds for the cut, and then we'll see what the miniatures are like once they're finished in the machine. So it's about 9 hours later. Of course, as I said before, the machine and the slicer program give you different times, when in reality they were both saying 7 hours, 8 hours. The actual time was 9.5 hours. Work that out. So what we've done is taken the build plate out of the machine, and you can see what we have here. So this is our unsupported miniature here and our supported miniature there. So both looking pretty good. The difference is quite immediate. There's not a lot of supports on our unsupported one, like that. We didn't get a lot of scaffolding on that, which might work to our advantage, might be a problem. Same again on the bases. You can see this is the unsupported one, which looks okay. We won't tell until we've cleaned it. And then our pre-supported one, which is just a forest of scaffolding underneath, which is fine. We can always just sand that down later on. Once you get to this point, you'll notice everything has resin on it. It's a mess. This is probably the messiest part of 3D printing. So what we have to do now is A, remove this stuff off the build plate and then put it into some cleaner. And what I'm using for cleaning is a mixture of warm water and all-purpose cleaner and degreaser, because this just helps really clean all the uncured resin off the miniature. So if you guys in the States are wondering what the equivalent is, it's Simple Green. You guys should know that by now. Simple Green seems to do everything that duct tape does, only it's not tape. It does everything, it cleans everything that duct tape wouldn't stick. There you go. So what we need to do first is get this off the build plate, and I need to grab a tool. This is the scary part, because you're always worried about breaking something. So get my scraper and very carefully, he says very carefully, we'll try the other side of it, wedge it underneath like that. Same there. Don't be too worried about this step, because the resin hasn't completely cured. It's still a little bit flexible. Like that. There, and what I like to do as well once we've done that is just slide along the build plate, just in case there's any debris. And that is our build plate ready to be cleaned and set up again for our next print. So we can move that to this side. Now we have all our parts, and we're going to put them into our cleaner. So the cleaning solution is a little bit warm, but not boiling. You don't want to be actually hurting yourself. You also notice I'm wearing nitrile gloves for this part. So it's just a case of chucking all the parts in, like so. Got a little brush. We'll take our unsupported base here and just start to scrub all the excess resin off. This doesn't take long, but you can let the model steep for a while, or if you have an ultrasonic cleaner, you can also use that. Once that's done, the scaffolding should be in such a way that it'll just separate from the part without any issue. And it'll leave a little bit of a texture where the supports have come off. You'll see as well, you'll probably see it more clearly. I'll get some photography of this stuff once it's clean and dry. Just the few little marks that the supports have left, because I set the contact point as a sphere, so there'll be little lumps that we can sand and file away later on. Now, once the parts are washed, we'll do the rest of them later. We then need to cure the rest of the parts. So if we come over this way, Warren built this device quite a while ago and hasn't used it a lot. So this is ultraviolet LEDs in a silver painted box. All we need to do is put the part in there. I then need to plug it in, and we get ultraviolet light roughly at the right frequency needed to cure it. Because this is sort of off the shelf, not really, well, this was the best Warren could do with the equipment that we had available to us locally. So what we do is we put the lid on this, leave it for about half an hour. After that, turn the parts over, another half an hour, parts are cured. Then after that, we can get into sanding and filing them all down. I will show you that process I will show you the finished product when we're starting to paint. So what you'll see here is a little bit of photography showing the parts cleaned, dried, cured and glued together, all off the supports. And I'll show you any differences between the two, if the pre-supported or the auto-supported one through Cheeto was better or basically the same. All right, so we have both the miniatures out of the bath. We have them glued to their bases, and I've also given them a very quick spray of some airbrush primer just to smooth everything out. I haven't really done any cleanup. I haven't ran around them and done anything with sanding or filing. I wanted to show these models straight off the machine, cleaned up, and just a very basic pass. So this one here is our pre-supported one, and this is the one that we auto-supported on Cheeto. Let's have a look at the auto-supported one first, because remember, it was upside down in the bath, so it's what we would expect to have a few more problems with it. And what you can see is here up on the top of her goggles, there is a little bit of material missing because some of the supports were connected to the outer edges of those goggles, and that has pulled away with the removal of the supports. We can also see, because there was a few supports on the hair, there's just a little bit of mess there, and there's a little bit on top of the helmet there. Now, what I will say is there's a few of the details, because she was orientated more or less upside down on the bed, there's a few damages. So there's a couple of the bullet tips here. One's missing, and a couple of them have a little bit of supports on them. You would need to very carefully file those away afterwards. The base is fine. It didn't really seem to matter too much. The only thing is, I think around here you can see where the supports were, and the material itself is a little bit bulged out. But that's just a matter of running around it with a bit of sandpaper afterwards if you want to do that. However, the pre-supported one, you'll see in a minute, it was better. Overall, fairly decent detail on there. It's a little bit spongy in places, or a little bit soapy in places, particularly on finer aspects like the lace on her boots. There's a couple of other places as well, but that's not too important. What we will look at though is our pre-supported one. And the pre-supported one has got a lot more detail going on. It's a lot tidier, it's a lot tighter. You can see on the top of the helmet, even the details around the edges of the goggles are a lot more visible. There's practically no damage or no real visible support. Leftovers is a little bit down in there. But the bullets for the weapon in particular are a lot clearer. Just get her to zoom a bit closer there. There's a little bit of cleanup that could be done there, which I'll probably do before we go on to painting it. But in general, we have a very high quality model that has come out of the printer with no real issues whatsoever. And what can we say? Pre-supported is definitely the way to do it. So if we can try and get a bit of a side-by-side here, just to show the detail changes, the differences are minimum, but I think it's just enough to say that the pre-supported is definitely just a safer bet. You may as well just go with that, safer bet, and get the miniature out of the printer without any hassle. So that is the end of that. We're going to take our pre-supported one away, and we're going to include her in our 3 Colors Up series. But until then, hope you've enjoyed this one and it's been a bit informative. And until next time, take care and see you again soon.